Now at 11, a story of survival told by a man who says God gave him a second chance at life just as his body was giving up after a COVID-19 diagnosis. After more than 200 days in the hospital, he was able to walk out on his own, leaving with a new perspective on life and a new set of lungs. On Your Side's Robert Bradfield shares his remarkable story tonight and highlights the life-saving work being done right here in North Florida.
When your legs don't work like they used to be.
My O2 saturation kept dropping and getting lower and lower and lower to the point where they had to intubate me.
Will your mouth still remember the taste of my love?
They said that I would be a prime candidate for lung transplant if they could get me down there.
'Cause darling, I'll be loving you till we're 70.
I don't know how I was still alive. The doctors were just mesmerized.
Matt Rogers is a miracle man.
Wasted away to nothing.
He says a COVID diagnosis last year should have killed him.
Apparently COVID, it didn't like me at all. Just had a rough time going through it.
His lungs were failing, filled with fluid and inflamed. At one point, his wife was urged to sign "Do not resuscitate" papers. She refused. Matt, an air evac flight nurse, was life-flighted by his own crew to Mayo Clinic, Jacksonville, as a patient for a double lung transplant.
My doctors at Mayo said I had a couple of hours left at best, probably, when I arrived.
Matt spent 15 and a half hours on the operating table. Doctors also performed a double heart bypass. He is one of 6 patients at Mayo Clinic, Jacksonville, to receive a lung transplant since the start of the pandemic.
And that is resulting into lung disease that is not recoverable.
Not all patients are candidates for transplants. In some cases, they may be too sick, and others may die waiting for an organ, which highlights the need for more donors.
As the time goes on and more patients are infected with this infection, those numbers are going to change, unfortunately.
Transplant candidates are prioritized on a detailed analysis that includes everything from physical health to the physical distance between patient and donor. From March 2020 through the end of 2021, 282 lung transplants were performed on patients whose primary diagnosis was COVID-related.
Lung transplants are done not in terribly large numbers across the country. And prior to the pandemic, obviously, nobody had the need for a lung transplant because of COVID. But since the pandemic, that has steadily increased.
UF Health Shands in Gainesville is leading the country in lung transplants. Since early 2020, 32 patients received new lungs under the care of the transplant team and Dr. Abbas Shamahamadi.
We feel the sadness, we feel the setbacks of all these patients, and we use that as a strength for us to see it provide us to want to push more and more to help as many patients as we can.
All 32 patients were unvaccinated, but Dr. Shamahamadi says some of the transplant surgeries happened before a vaccine was available.
Our hope and desire is that nobody has to go through the suffering of lung failure and multi-organ failure from COVID, and vaccination is the key to that.
Matt is doing much better. He credits the doctors and the nurses who were by his side, pushing him to reach his goal of walking out of the hospital, which he did after a 227-day stay.
Are you a free man?
A new lease on life after his was almost taken away, and a new perspective on what matters most.
Love your families. Hug them. Because you never know. If there's one thing I could say, it's that. We take so much for granted in this life, and it's just it's just a shame we do it.
So long now.
Robert Bradfield.
Oh, you're a hard one.
First Coast News, on your side.
Oh, I know know that you got your reason.
I love the shirt he was wearing when he walked out of the hospital. It said victory. And you know, when we interviewed Matt, he was actually at the golf course. He says he never lost his swing. And doctors tell us that you can still be an organ donor even if you've had COVID. You can learn more about becoming an organ donor. Just look for this story on firstcoastnews.com and the First Coast News app.